Okay, great.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Michaeleen Doucleff. Now, for those of you that don't know who she is, she's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Hunt, Gather, Parent, What Ancient Cultures Can Teach Us About the Lost Art of Raising Happy, Helpful Little Humans. I'm not a parent yet, but you need this book, honestly, and I love learning from ancient cultures because I'm a history nerd. The book describes a way of raising helpful and confident children, which today I think is getting more and more lost, unfortunately. And get this, Michaeleen has several degrees. She also reports for NPR's Science Desk, where she talks about disease outbreaks in children's health, which we just said a moment ago, there's a lot of outbreaks happening around the world. So she's a very busy lady, but she has a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Berkeley, California, a master's degree in viticulture. Did I say that correctly?
It's viticulture, but yeah.
Viticulture. I'm going to have to ask you what that is in a moment. And enology, right? Is that also?
Yeah, correct? Viticulture and enology. So it's the study of grapes is viticulture, the growing grapes, and enology is the study of winemaking.
How fascinating is that? From the University of California, Davis, and you've also got a bachelor's degree in biology, just to top it all off, from Caltech. Michaeleen, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I've been very much looking forward to speaking with you. Before we dive into your backstory and how in the world you got from studying viticulture and enology to writing about a book on parenting, as well as reporting on diseases and outbreaks and all that sort of stuff from NPR. My very first question for you is, what does success look like for you?
You mean personally or as a parent or career-wise or
let's go with personally, and then does it sort of tie into career-wise as well?
I mean, I definitely think that there's an element of, I think when I was younger, success really was focused on career. I think as I've gotten older, I think success has focused more on like feeling good, like enjoying what I'm doing and feeling kind of mentally healthy, which I think is lost, like you say, in our culture. I think that element has been devalued and deprioritized in our lives. And I think that spills over into how we raise children. We value other aspects almost to the detriment. And writing this book taught me personally that actually what makes me feel good and what, day to day feels like success is connecting with other people, collaborating, helping other people, and at the same time feeling proud of the work that I do, which, that's what success looks like.
I love diving into the big questions straight away. So I want to dive straight in, which is, why has culture and society gone so far away from, I guess, feeling good as a parent, teaching our kids the right way, all those sort of things?
I mean, it's a complex question, but I think that there's some like big triggers or big root causes for it. I think one of the things that has happened is that we've lost the teachers. So there in the book, I talk about how the Catholic Church is kind of has been involved in this process, but for basically all of human existence, so we're talking about 200,000, 300,000 years, people raised children in groups. So there was a mom and a dad, and then there were these other people. And these other people, saying other people sounds like they're like on the periphery, but they weren't. They were like key people that loved and took care of the child just as much as the mom and the dad. And we've lost these people in the home over about 500-year period. We've slowly kind of whittled down this cooperative parenting approach to like one or two people. And when we did that, we lost the teachers because these people not only helped raise the children, but they also taught the new parents what to do. And so about 200 years ago, parents started kind of being like, oh, holy cow, what do I do? And this is actually when you see the rise of parenting books and classes and parenting experts and stuff. But before then, we didn't need that because we had the experts right there. And so in the book, basically, I go to places where those experts are still there. And because those experts are still there, the traditions and the value and the techniques that have been like tried and true over thousands of years, perhaps even longer, are still very strong in the household and still very present and valued. And so that's really what the book is about, is bringing back these like ancient ways of interacting with children. And, you say you're not a parent, but these are ways that people interact with each other as well, right? It's not just the parent-child relationship. I say that I wrote a parenting book, but I really fixed my marriage, because once I started interacting with my husband in the same way as my daughter, Rosy, in the book, our marriage really got better too. So that skill of relating to other people was taught to parents, to individuals, by this like extended family. And it's not always family. It's, neighbors, friends, but very typically intergenerational.
I've got quite a few questions coming from that response, but I wanted to ask you, where along the line, so to speak, did this shift start to happen? Like, we're talking about thousands of years, right? So
No, we're not talking that long. No. We're talking about, it probably started about, like I talk about in the book. I think we're talking about centuries to 1,000 years. So there's a study, this incredibly interesting study from the University of British Columbia, and now one of the scientists is at Harvard, where they look at actually when this started changing in Europe and around the world, because it's kind of shifted in a lot of places. And they trace it back to the Catholic Church having these policies that started making it illegal to marry relatives. Now, we don't want to marry our cousins for reasons, very good reasons, and so they said, hey, it's illegal to marry your cousin. Okay. And, but then over the years and the centuries, and I think this was started about 1500, but we should double check that. Over the centuries, these rules got more and more and more. And the Catholic Church kind of became obsessed with this. And some people think that it's the way that the Catholic Church had gained more power because they broke up very powerful families. But they started saying, okay, you couldn't marry your second cousin, your third cousin, your fourth cousin. And at the end of it, you can't marry in-laws, right? I mean, me marrying an in-law is totally fine biologically. And by the end of it, I think they were up to like 6 cousins, which like you and I are 6 cousins, right? I mean, at some level. So like there was just no reason for it. But what this study shows is that process broke up these big families that were like living near each other and together, and slowly eroded, the traditional family, which is a lot of people living near each other and interacting with each other all day long to raise children and really function in life. There's other reasons. There's the rise of individualism in Western culture. The rise of the Industrial Revolution probably played a role. Rise of privacy, some people tell me. There's other reasons, but I think this is a really key one. And this study actually showed that the longer the Catholic Church has influenced a culture, the smaller these extended families are, and the more the nuclear family is present. So there is this kind of erosion effect that the Catholic Church has had, which is totally fascinating to me. But it's had a huge impact on our lives, because if you think about it, if you grow up in a home where you've got a couple siblings, an aunt, a grandma, maybe some cousins, maybe a neighbor, uncle, all living in your house, you have a very different set of skills socially than, living with mom, dad, and 1 or 2 kids, right? You become much more accommodating. You become, less individualistic, more cooperative. And so this shrinking of the family has had massive, massive effects, not just on our parenting, but on our psychology as well.
When we're talking about being a good parent, how much does religion sort of play a factor into that? And in terms of sort of the structure around discipline and raising a good, healthy child, does religion have any part of that? I mean, we're talking about the Catholic Church, which I think is a set of rules and structures, and that's largely a wider body of religious things. Is there any truth to what I'm saying? Is there anything?
I don't study that aspect, but I didn't see that. I went to places with very different religions, and what was very interesting to me, and why I wrote this book is that I've been traveling for my job at NPR for like a decade. Yeah. And even before I started writing the book, I started to realize that wherever you go, so if we're talking about on the side of a volcano in the Philippines to, the Arctic to, the Yucatan in Mexico, like wherever you really go, you see some very similar elements to parenting and relating to children. And it's actually very striking because these are very different places that have been separated through huge amounts of time, but people interact with the child in a very similar way when it comes to about 4 or 5 things. And if you look through Western history, you can find these things not that long ago. So the book is really showing you things that are independent of kind of cultural specifics of a place. And I mean, some people don't believe me that this is very, very consistent, but I'm not the first person to say this. There's an anthropologist, David Lindsay, who studied childhood around the world his entire career, and he writes about this in books. But you talk to people that study childhood in different cultures, and they all know this, that there's these givens and we in Western culture, we've kind of veered off that path and lost those kind of core elements. And the book is really about bringing those back. And what they do, which is that they minimize conflict and maximize cooperation. And so that's, again, really what Other Parent is about, is learning how to cooperate with your child, teach them to cooperate, and, bring the conflict down, because Western culture is incredibly conflictual compared to other cultures. And that was a direct quote from a psychologist. There's something inherently conflictual about the way we interact with people, and with children, it can be really bad. So the book is really about learning this other way, which is really common around the world.
It's interesting as well. And I've always said too, and if you really nail down on it, if you want to change a generation, you educate the kids, you change the kids.
Yeah. For sure. And people are really good at kind of teaching kids to be themselves, and so
what
that's why
that
these things same time. Well, it's interesting because when I was writing the book, I kind of came up with this formula about how you teach kids things. And in the middle of writing the book, I was realizing that I was teaching my kid all these things that I didn't realize I was teaching them through this formula. It's very subconscious. Our culture just does it. But the beauty of it is that once you start to realize that, you can really change it, right? You can say, well, I'm not going to teach, them to be selfish, to be argumentative, to be conflictual, which is what we actually do. I can teach them to be cooperative and generous and kind. And we try to do those things, but we don't have the tools. And we're kind of doing the opposite with the way we interact with them right now.
Kids are very observant. They're very...
Oh, incredible. So we think this is something that's really weird. So in the book, I talk about a handful of things that we do that are really, really weird. So something that Western culture does that you don't really find anywhere else is that we think teaching involves talking, right? That you teach a child something by instructing them. And I've actually been calling it instructing instead of teaching, that you tell them how to do it. You set up a lecture, and the learning through other methods is kind of devalued. We know it happens, but we don't really believe it. But in fact, it's a super powerful way that children learn. You do not have to say a word. If they are there and they are invited to be involved, every now and then to do a small task that contributes to that skill, they will learn it. It might take a little while, but they will absolutely learn it. And they're already learning all the things that way anyway that you don't realize is happening. So.
And nowadays we have the advent of social media playing a huge role in educating our kids. And we give them phones and social and iPads and things like that very early on. We give them pretty much access to all these, I guess you could call it, for lack of a better term, I think it's a little bit dangerous for a kid at 3, 4 years old to have a social media account. It doesn't work, but that actually happens in today's society. And we're giving these kids the wrong kinds of tools, and we're teaching them the wrong kinds of things. And I've just noticed that it's just contributing to a poorer society, if that makes sense.
I think that what we're teaching them with the phone and social media, which I feel like a lot of people don't realize, I didn't really realize that until a psychologist pointed out to me, is we are teaching them individualism.
Yeah.
Right. We're teaching them to be focused on themselves, to really engage in this task that's really about them and not connected, not socially really connected to the people in their lives physically. Right. It's a very individualistic tool. And from a very early age, that desire that children have to look at the world around them and be attentive to the world around them, you're eroding that desire by putting the phone in front of them, right? And I think that can have really long-term repercussions because they become dependent on that tool for their well-being, right? There's a lot of studies that show that, right? Like these phones have release incredible amounts of dopamine, and kids become kind of dependent on that dopamine. And so, I mean, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it really is a tool to teach individualism, and one of the psychologists actually that studies the Mayan community that we went to is concerned because during the pandemic, all of the parents there had to get a phone to track COVID. The government bought them phones. And she said, she's like wondering like what before a lot of families had one phone or an iPad, but the phone like exploded in the last couple of years in this little village. And she's like, I don't know what impact that's going to have, but it's clearly this like tool of individualism. And not to mention the dependency and dopamine and stuff like that. So, but I thought that was really interesting because I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't thought of it as like kind of antagonistic to cooperation and learning to work together with do things. So, a very social activities. Right.
And it's amazing how fast it's actually grown. Like it's only in the last couple of years too, because I grew up late 90s, early 2000s. And I wasn't allowed to have a phone until much later on in my life. Yeah. And if you wanted to sort of like do stuff, you went outside, you played, I remember playing with the street kids all the time. Like, but nowadays you barely see that, if at all. Like I'm blessed to be up here in the sunny coast in Queensland, and there's like parks all around. And I love seeing kids just playing. Because it means they're getting off technology and they're socializing in nature and with other kids too. It's a beautiful sight to see, because I think we need to get back to that foundational part of play.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you said the word right, like the connection with nature, right? I mean, humans have been connected very deeply with nature for, ever, right? And it has been very recently that there are kids that are completely disconnected from nature. And the pandemic like made this worse. There's adults that are completely disconnected from nature. I mean, that's a big thing I think parents also don't realize is like, you have to work a little bit to show the child and build a connection with nature with that child, right? If you are on your phone, you are, on the computer, you're showing the child, you're teaching the child a relationship with technology, right? But if you want that kid to go outside and play, then you need to show them how you have a relationship with nature, right? And so in the book, I talk a lot about this formula, right? Like model, practice, and value or acknowledge. And, if you're not modeling being outside, connecting with the birds, connecting with the land through, gardening or yard work or carpentry or, anything that's somewhat based on a natural product, children will have a natural drive to do it, but they're going to be much more likely to want to do it, right? And then giving them practice, giving them opportunities to practice. Hey, come help me in the garden. Come help me with the yard work. This is how children learn, not when you tell them. It's modeling and practicing and then saying, valuing it like, wow, I really feel great after I garden. Wow, does it feel so good to get outside and be outside? Prioritizing in your life. Like, we're going to spend 2 or 3 hours a week outside. I can work outside, right? And most people can do some work outside. And Rosy and I before we moved to Texas, into this little rural town where now we spend all the time gardening, we would just go to the park and I would work, or we go to the beach and I would work, and Rosy and we would just be outside. And it was, and I did this so she could have a relationship with nature and build that relationship on her own. We spent time with this hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania called the Hadzabe, and it is just kind of mind-blowing how much time those children spend outside. Yeah. Right. We are talking about like 10 hours a day. Right. And that is likely the way children evolved. Right. Even up in the Arctic where kids have video games and cell phones, and they still were spending 6-7 hours outside. And I think that was one of the key differences is they had relationship with technology, but the parents taught them and introduced them and really built also a relationship with being outside. I always joke around when we were up there in the Arctic, it was in the summertime, and one of the grandmother that we were with went out on this like 7-10 day hunting trip where they go out on the land, they hunt. And, she brought some of the kids with her, some of the older kids and stuff. So she had this, she has this incredible connection with the land. Right. But then when she got back, she's like, man, I've got to catch up on CSI, she's like, so, it wasn't, they're not exclusive of each other, right? Like a relationship with TV and media and a relationship with the land and outside. You can have both. Yeah. You just have to make an effort to have both, and that really is modeling, practicing it and valuing it,
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with Johan Hari in his new book, Stolen Focus, and he was talking about how we need just to spend some time away from our phones and technology. And he has what they call, I think it's like a lockbox. So you put your phone in there. And I haven't got one, but I'm trying my absolute best these days to just try and now with a girlfriend and everything, it's a bit difficult because you want to talk all the time. But in saying that, I do try and find time to just be in nature, like early in the morning, for example. I'll go for a run and do my things I need to do. But on last Sunday, actually, I went to the beach and I just spent over an hour or 2 hours, didn't touch my phone once, just enjoyed it. And it was so serene. It was so peaceful. I loved it. I'm like, I want to do more of this.
So, that's the thing is you have to do it to start to, and it takes time. Like, it can be the feeling can be very uncomfortable at first because our brains are accustomed to that amount of dopamine, right? And like falling off that dopamine is uncomfortable. And the same with kids, right? Falling off the dopamine of videos and classes and instructions and intention, it makes you feel uncomfortable. But I think the key thing you said is like, once you get over that discomfort, check in and see how it feels, I got off social media except for Twitter, but I got off Facebook and everything else, I think like 2017 or something. And what I started doing was I started really checking in with myself while I was on it. Like, what is my mood like before I get on it? And then what's my mood like while I'm on it? And like, maybe I'll stop using it if I start feeling kind of negative feelings, right? And I started being like that I would get on it and get right off of it. Because like immediately I was feeling like more anxious or, upset about something. And it started to be easy to get off of it because it was like, this is clearly having this negative impact on my mood. And the same thing with the phone, right? So once you start to like have these breaks, vacations from your phone, like I go all days on weekends. I actually didn't have a phone while I was writing the book. I didn't have a phone.
Wow.
But then I know it's crazy. Then when I went back to work, NPR made me get a phone again. But yeah, I'll just leave. I will they were like, send it to me. And then they were like, you have to open it, Michaeleen. And I opened it. They're like, you have to use it, Michaeleen. But I will have Saturdays and Sundays where, I'll check my mail in the morning maybe, and then I'll just put the phone away all day long. And then Saturday, the same thing. And my mood by the end of Sunday is so different than because, I haven't been looking at the news. I haven't been thinking about work. I haven't been hearing all whatever the people are complaining about on text messages. And I actually don't want to go back to it on Monday. I'm like, I don't want to go back to this thing. But you can start to get in this positive feedback loop where it's easier and easier. I think the problem is there's always a reason to have it. You can always come up with a reason. And people tell me, but I'm a news reporter. And I'm like, well, I'm a news reporter too. You can, and one of the doctors at Stanford that I talked to about this, she said, like, it's just like drinking. There's always a reason you can have another drink. You can always convince yourself. And that type of thinking is what's going to never get you off of it. Right. Yeah. It really is just like, again, like prioritizing it. Like, no, this device makes me have negative feelings, makes my body feel bad, makes my mind feel bad. So why am I carrying it around? There is an addiction component to it. And to break that, you have to have breaks from it. Like the doctor told me, she said, it's all about how much you use it and the intensity of the experience, right? And so any break you take from it, like the lockbox, or, even if it's just like an hour a day, like you're going to start to bring down your like requirement of dopamine in your brain. You're going to start to reset your brain a little bit, and it becomes like easier and easier. I actually, this is the last thing I'll say about it. I actually started doing this when my first trip up to the Arctic. I spent 2 weeks out on this peninsula where there wasn't any phone coverage. And I got back and I was just like, oh my God, like I feel so much better. And then I started using the phone again, and it was the other way. I was like, oh my God, like I feel so much worse. And it took time to wean myself off of it. But oh my God, it was so worth it. Because you're right. Like we've lived our lives without them, like I traveled for this book without a phone. To my husband's chagrin, but you don't need it. You can get around life without it, and the fact that everyone's carrying one means you can get around way easier.
It's like we've created this society that makes it almost we need to depend on the phone.
Well, we think we do. That is the problem. And that's the message that we've been sent, and we are sent constantly. So a lot of this book too is about kind of being conscious of the messages you're getting, right? About how to be a parent, about what you need to do to be a good parent, and one of the messages our society gives us all the time is that you can't function without a phone.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's true. You can't function without a phone. I would argue most people can, but that is very different than carrying your phone around with you and checking it every 3 minutes, but there is a very strong messaging component of you absolutely need a phone to be in society. Mm-hmm. And I will argue to the end that is made up.
Yeah. I encourage people to read your book, and in tandem with that, to read Johan Hari's book, Stolen Focus, because it's also interesting how they've created the phone, like the addictive element is getting a notification, getting the vibration on the phone and in your pocket. It's like, oh, someone's contacted me. Fantastic. Like it with emails too, getting that ding or whatever text message, whatever it is so powerful. But yeah. I love it how you were talking about how we don't need to rely so heavily on it. We can get away from it. So
it's a choice. You are choosing to use it, right? And there's another good book I'll recommend is How to Do Nothing. I cited it in my book, this book, because she talks a lot about like, you're making a choice, right? And you have the right of refusal. You really do. And the thing is, we'll get back to parenting, because the thing is if parents are struggling with screens and children, there's a couple of things. I can give you advice if you haven't introduced the screen. I would say do not give a child a phone. I mean, like in the Mayan community, traditionally children didn't get phones until they could pay for it. Right. So they had to work, they had to pay for the phone, they had to pay for the service. And so kids didn't get phones until they were like 16. Right. That's what I'm going to do with Rosy. Like, I'm not going to give her a phone. I don't even want a phone myself. Right. She can buy it, because it's a very different brain at 16 than at 6. Right. But if you've introduced the screens and you're having problems with it, I think one thing to realize is that it will take time to wean a kid off. It is a very uncomfortable feeling if you but that goes away. There's like us on the other side, there's something. But one of the tips that I found really useful is like, they have to start kind of enriching their lives outside the technology, because if they've been on a screen so much, that other part of their lives, playing outside with friends, connecting with nature, socializing with friends, reading, playing games, imaginary games, is kind of impoverished.
Yeah.
Right. Because it hasn't been nurtured. Right. And so one of the things you can do is start nurturing that, start finding things in your community that have nothing to do with the phone, people that don't use their phone, and start trying to slowly nurture that aspect. I mean, adults need to do this too, right? Your lives. The number one thing that you can do is to have these periods of time where you're not using a screen.
Yeah.
And psychologists tell me that the biggest problem is usually the parent is addicted to the screen, their phone. And it's going to be really hard to get the kid off if you are, right. I mean, because again, what's the formula? Model, practice, right? And valuing and acknowledging. And when every time you use it, you're valuing it and acknowledging your value of it, right? Yeah. So,
yeah, we were speaking about that just a moment ago, actually. So good to tie that in. And I wanted to ask you, this is more of it may seem like a dumb question, but I'm curious about it because I've got a German Shepherd. I knew I was going to bring this in. You've got a German Shepherd too. Is there anything that you've learned from your German Shepherd dog, Savannah, regarding parenting?
Oh my God. I love this question and nobody's ever asked me. And I even thought about writing a story about like how my German Shepherd taught me to be a better parent. So there's a couple things. Number one, Savannah is a German Shepherd. But she is the calmest, most gentle spirit one of them that I've encountered in my life. And she's almost imperturbable. Now she will speak her mind. She will, if you push her a little bit, she will growl. If you're hurting, it'll be a little bit, but when the neighbor Chihuahua comes over and starts biting at her face, that little whippersnapper, she just sits there and hardly even and I channel that. She has taught me to how not to react to the little Chihuahuas snapping at your face. Now, if they push it too far and they're going to hurt you, so little Chihuahua is really my kid, right? They push it too far and they're really going to hurt you, or you want to teach them. Yeah. All you need to do is a little growl, a little show of the teeth. You don't need to overreact, right? And a lot in our culture, we tend to overreact. Like, stop, what are you doing? We know lots of words. All you need is a good look, maybe a word or two. Maybe you need to walk away. All the things that Savannah does incredibly well. The other thing that Savannah has done but I literally, when we got her right after I finished the book, and I was like, oh my God, she's like such a good parent. Like, she doesn't respond to things that don't need to be responded to, right? Like, a big thing in the book is basically about shutting up, right? Like, just let 99% of the time you can just be quiet, walk away, no arguing, be calm yourself. The child will become calm if you're calm. And Savannah does this amazingly, but she's not a pushover, right? She will growl. She will walk away, The other thing that she's done, which has been really remarkable, is I've used her as like a surrogate sibling for Rosy. And because I'm the voice of Savannah, she can be the perfect sibling. And I've taught her how to treat a sibling, and, what you need to do, how you share, how you help, how you're gentle, how you have to accommodate for them because they're in this case, the younger puppy, and I use her as this way, because that's how a lot of parents do is teach generosity and kindness and respect, and accommodation through the siblings and the responsibility of being a big sister or a big brother. And so I use Savannah that way. And I have to say, I think it's worked amazingly. Parents will comment Rosy really knows how to be a big sister, when she goes over to other people's houses and stuff. So because I can make her anything I want. I have a voice. It's like, oh, Rosy, I'd like a piece of that candy too. What about your little sister? So anyway, I'm kind of crazy, but
No, I love it because I'm crazy too. I've got a German Shepherd, and it's interesting as well because I'm not a parent, but our dog Alita Joy, she is, like you were saying, she has that calming presence, and whenever I'm stressed or anxious, I go straight to her, and she'll give me a hug or give me a kiss and just let me know it's going to be okay. But it's also interesting how if I'm reacting, she will try and de-escalate every situation.
Bring it down.
She'll come between if myself and my mom are having an argument or something, she'll come in between us and you would try and get rid of that argument somehow in the best way possible. Like it's just a fascinating phenomenon how she does that. And I wanted to ask you, having said all of this stuff about parenting, I mean, there's so much more we could actually talk about. So maybe another time I'll need to bring you back on for a part 2 conversation. But having said all of this, what makes a good parent versus a great parent?
I mean, I think, there's a couple of things that really changed me with Rosy. And I think one of them was being quiet, for several reasons. I think a great parent says very few things to a child. So in the book, I talk about like what autonomy looks like. Children absolutely need autonomy to be mentally healthy, they grow, they gain confidence. A lot of the mental health problems we have with kids and eventually young adults is they haven't had enough autonomy. And what autonomy looks like is a parent basically saying about 2 or 3 things to a child an hour. And if you go out and you look at parents at the park or wherever you are, there are not many parents that do that. And it's not the parent not interacting and not being there, but the parent is watching.
Yeah.
The parent is watching Rosy climb up the fig tree when she's 4 or 3 to see how far she, or standing underneath her and being quiet, but being there to catch her if she falls, and watching and seeing, okay, how high can she go? What is her skill level like? When do I need to intervene? When can I let her go? Right. That is a great parent that like stands back a little bit and actually kind of actively checks themselves before they interfere. Because this is how children grow and feel confident and don't feel stressed. Right. And there's this sense in our culture that the more you say to a child, the better parent you are. And that's really weird. And I would argue it's the other way around. I think the less you say to a child, the less you interfere. And the more gentle that interference is, just like talking about Savannah, a little growl versus that's what makes a great parent. It's funny when we go out with people, I think sometimes they want to see like how I parent because of this book, and I think sometimes they're disappointed because you don't see very much, it's very subtle. And I think that's why a lot of this has been missed, what's in the book, because you have to pay attention really closely. So I'll tell you a story. The first time I went to the Maya village, they were shucking corn, and the mom and the dad, and one of the moms and dads. And I felt like, okay, I need to help them shuck the corn. Like I'm here, I'm just standing around. So I start shucking corn and I can't do it. It's really hard. Like my fingers can't do it. And then all of a sudden I start to be able to do it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm shucking corn. And I can do it now. And I got really excited. Then I looked down and I realized that the mom had been starting them for me. So she didn't say a word. She didn't jump in and grab the corn and make an instructional video about how you do it. She just facilitated it a little bit, and she made me believe that I was doing it. And that's how they teach. And eventually with that practice, my fingers would get stronger and I would be able to shuck the corn, right? But the mom is, just this little tiny help that the child doesn't even know. The child thinks they're doing it on their own. That to me is like a great parent.
I remember having a conversation with Matthew McConaughey and asking him what makes a good parent as well. And the way he grew up, his dad, there was no such word as can't in the house. I just remember the story of him sharing. We both had lawnmower stories. Funny enough, but it was very, very much like, it's not that you can't do it, it's that you're having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah. You need some practice. Yeah, exactly. And I think I kind of emphasize this in the book. It's like, we really underestimate what kids can do physically. Like we grab the knife from them. Okay, if the knife is giant, okay, yeah, grab the knife and give them a smaller one. If they start climbing on a wall, go underneath them or gently take them to something that's safer, right? Like use that desire to do things as a way of pushing their growth and so absolutely, we just shut it down.
Yeah.
Right. This is not safe. We baby proof everything, we did a piece about, there's a lot in the book about kids running errands, and parents will say, well, it's just our neighbor's just not safe, or she's just not ready. Okay, but she's not ready maybe to ride her bike all the way to school or to ride to the market and back, but maybe she's ready to go into the market by herself. Yeah. Right. Or bike halfway, or, after she crosses, you help her cross a busy street, right? Like, exactly. It's not about can't, it's about like, let's figure out a way that you can do it that fits your skill level. Right. And then what happens is over time, that skill gets bigger and you have a kid that can go all the way to the market and back. Right. Instead of having a kid when they're 12, don't know how to cross the street, which is what we end up here. So yeah, it's not, I like that. It's not about can't, but it's like, how can we adjust the situation so that the kid can participate? The kid can do it.
So be protective, but don't be overly protective of the kid, essentially.
I mean, just don't be stupid, right? I mean, like
common sense.
I think you're right. I mean, like, it's like, it's like Rosy one time was like climbing on our roof, and clearly like Rosy should not be climbing on a 4-story roof. Right. But okay, what is that telling me? What is she trying to tell me? She needs more freedom. She needs more adventure. She needs more risk. Yeah. Right. And so it's like kind of watching them and figuring out like, what's going on here? What is, and then figuring out a way that they can do what they're trying to do and in a safer way, or they can grow a little bit. Like we gave Rosy like a steak knife when she was like 2, and she was like cutting tomatoes and cutting things, and now she's 6 and now she uses a regular knife. We slowly like built up to it, or the parent one of the interesting things is parents will demonstrate to kids, like, why you can't go near the fire. Yeah. Here we would just get rid of the fire, but like, no, if the mom burns himself on the stove look, this is what the fire does. So the kid doesn't have to burn themselves to learn that. You can demonstrate it through your life. You can teach them hot, you can teach them sharp, right? But it's slow. These things are slow. And that's why using those little kind of baby steps is important, because that's how you grow safely, right? It's like slowly kind of lengthening the cord instead of just throwing them out there. Interestingly, Rosy loves being at the pool, but she never wanted to put her head under. And people were always like, well, you have to give her swimming lessons. And she didn't want to. And I was like, well, let's just see what happens if I just keep taking her to the pool and, kind of when she wants to do something more, being there or help facilitate that. And, she's 6, and a lot of parents are like, oh, she has to take swimming lessons. This is getting too late, kids. And lo and behold, this year, after like 10 trips to the pool, she started putting her head under. Then she started, using her arms. And it was just like, we had no lessons, but it was just her being there, modeling with the other kids. And then, a little bit of help when she needed it, right? Like a little bit of like, but no instruction, which I think some parents would find hard to believe. The same thing with the bike. Yeah. No instruction. She just watched and tried and watched. And, every now and then I would go out there and hold her a little bit, but like, that's it,
I mean, when I was growing up, we had a pool in the backyard. So essentially my way of learning how to swim was being put in the shallow end. At first you have floaties, right?
Right.
Once you get a little bit more confident, you take them off, and then you stay in the shallow end for a little bit until you build up more confidence to go into the deeper end. And
that's exactly right.
It builds up to going underwater and staying underwater and like feeling more confident to stay under there for a long period of time, probably too long. And then it's like with the bike thing, you have training wheels for a little bit, and then you wean yourself up. You fall off a couple of times, and that's all right. We should allow kids to fail sometimes. And
they're built to learn this way. Like in many cultures, the word for teaching and learning is the same. So if the kid is like doing something, like you say, like in the deep end, trying to go under, maybe the mom is sitting there making sure if it goes under too long, she's going to grab him. Right. Like then again, don't be stupid. Yeah. But the kid, they would say the kid is teaching themselves. Right. And that is how kids have evolved to learn, is through this like autonomous exploration with some modeling. And actually a lot of times other kids are way better models than the parent. And I think that's really how Rosy learned, was by watching like the 8-year-old. right? Because the 8-year-old is way closer to her skill, and there's data on this than I am, right? So the 8-year-old, and I even like enlisted the older kids. I was like, the 8-year-old, I was like, oh yeah, you got to teach Rosy how to swim, or show her how to swim, you know? And of course she wasn't doing very much, but you know, like enlist those other kids. It's great for both ends, right? The young ones learn and the older ones feel empowered and responsible, right? So I love that story about your swimming, because I don't think many people believe it. Kids, they do not need lessons. No. They really, really don't. For very few things in life do they need lessons.
I totally agree with you. Michaeleen, I know I've got to let you go in just a moment, but I've got one final question for you, if that's okay.
Yes.
This is my all-time favorite question. I love asking all my guests at the very end. It is a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of argument. But they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Oh my gosh. That's a crazy question. I mean, if I had my druthers right now, I would make like a documentary about the parents in the book. I would. I really want to. And people ask me for this. I feel like that's what I would want. I would want a documentary about other people. The parents in the book are amazing. The moms in the Yucatan, the moms and the dads in the Arctic, the dads in Tanzania. Their skills at raising children are incredible. You know, they are masters at it, and compared to many parents in Western society. And I don't think that that's been valued enough. And I think some of it's hard that seeing it would like really enrich the experience, you know? So I kind of skirted the question.
People can find you, Michaeleen, I think on Twitter. You've got a website.
On Twitter.
You've got your book, Hunt, Gather, and Parents, which is a great book. Everyone needs to go and get it. Michaeleen, I got to bring you back on another later day because there's so many more topics to cover. But thank you so much for joining me today on the Storybox podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about the dog. I'm going to write about that now.